What's happening, y'all? Welcome back. Acquire and Operate. We're buying and building niche, enduring, vertical B2B SaaS businesses. We've been at it for about 2 years. We're doing it in public. We're thrilled to have you with us. The topic du jour, you can kind of tell where we are in our world, is what happens after LOI. So this is meant to be a guide on both the buy and sell side and take you through kind of the headline chapters of final DD, final due diligence, as it's referred to, and talk through this is the headline, these are the typical buyer activities, and this is what the seller's role is, and try to clarify some of that stuff so it's not cloudy. Riding dirty with my boy Kjael. How are we?
Doing amazing, man. Just happy to be here.
Likewise. All right, well, let's jump in. So, we like metaphors to try and make this stuff a little more approachable. And so the metaphor here is you're buying a house. So imagine you go in, you look at the house, you've established, so you talk to the seller, you've established a point of view on the value of the home, on how you're going to pay for it. And instead of, I guess, in the house buying thing, it's like you give them a offer. In our world, you sign an LOI, which basically says the value is this, the payment terms are this. We've got a certain period of time where you're not going to show anybody else the house. And things, if they go well, they should close on this date. And this is what it should look like. So it's like the most macro view on terms, but it's a really important milestone for the buyer and the seller because getting to a common point of view on valuation is tricky, etc. But at this point, then it's like, okay, the inspectors are coming over and they're going to look at the plumbing and they're going to look at the roof and they're going to look at the foundation and they're going to look at all this other stuff that can be concerning and is stuff that you want to look at and kind of explore and analyze the nooks and crannies so that you feel good about the things. So that's what final diligence is, and that's the stuff that happens after LOI. A few things to talk about here before we jump in is you want to sequence activities. So back to the house analogy, let's say you're like, man, I flushed the toilet and it didn't really work. Well, then the first thing you probably want to do is look at the plumbing or whatever, inspect the bathroom. So you want final diligence to follow a very straightforward order of priority where you're trying to sniff out the things that either were kind of yellow flags for you or that conventionally could have the biggest impact to the business value or the assets, which in our case, and I'll just kind of talk you through like the headlines here. And this sequencing varies a little bit, but I would say it's pretty much standard is you start with tech due diligence, which is where you comb through the code base, cybersecurity, redundancy, data warehousing, yada, yada. Then you get into quality of earnings. And that's a little bit of a misnomer for SaaS because a lot of times most of that work is around kind of analyzing the revenues. In our world, it's all subscription-based recurring revenue. It's probably coming through Stripe. So it's like, yeah, cool. Looked at the quality of earnings. Yeah. So it's just more of like financial verification. So the first two steps are like, is there a landmine in the code base or insane tech debt that we didn't expect? If it passes go, cool. Then you move into financial verification. Did they cook the books? No. And then you move into, so green lights. As you pass green lights, you keep investing time. And what you'll notice too, just as important, is you're bringing in third-party advisors. So the spend is starting for both you and the seller. So you want to kind of do that. You spend more money as you mitigate risk and build conviction and kind of passing more green lights, more spend, more time, simply put.
And that's why it's super, super crucial to be very clear on your investment thesis and the qualification of deals, because wasting your time in a deal that you're going to back out of part of the way, it's like you've already invested so much time, energy, emotions, and money. Sometimes the seller might come back at you and say, hey, as part of this contract, you owe me for that time that was used. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And in the LOI, it's usually that everybody is accountable to their own fees. And I'll just say like broken deal costs. Let's just put it this way. We don't have much budget for broken deal costs.
So you understand, we need every dollar we can be having.
You don't want the deal to blow up, but you're happy to spend the money if you find a gotcha that would have made this kind of a nightmare situation. So you make it through tech diligence, you make it through financial verification or Q of E, which is short for quality of earnings. Then you get into negotiating the legal document, which we've spoken about in the past, which more often than not is the asset purchase agreement. And so needless to say, the tech DD on the buy side, you probably have a software engineer, leader, human that's going to do it. Not much spend there. You get to quality of earnings. Now you're looping in a third-party CPA. The clock's ticking. Then you get to the asset purchase agreement and you bring in the lawyers and the spend really starts. So That's why it's usually last. And then that's the stuff that you're doing. So let's jump in here and we'll bang through these with a little more detail. I'm going to share my screen.
Thanks, Kjael.
Yeah, you're welcome, friend. All right. So Tech DD, and these are for the listener or for the readers, they're broken out into buyer activities and then the seller's role. And then we also did a little bit of commentary around the typical advisors that are there. So Tech DD, probably not much more we need to say here. The thing is that the signed LOI, like you need to get to LOI before you can establish a really solid point of view on Tech DD. Because if you ask a seller, or if you are the seller, it's like, hey, let me get access to your GitHub repo and comb through the data or your code base. It's like, hell no. So there needs to be real kind of signal and intent and general agreement on a bunch of stuff. But generally speaking, you get access to the code base, the repos, the wherever, if it's a SQL database or whatever, and probably your team is going through it. But you might want to bring in a technical advisor. Historically, when I didn't have the team that I had, I for sure had a technical advisor. And there's a lot of folks that will do Tech DD off the shelf as a service, and it's reasonably affordable. On the sell side, they're providing access, and they don't really need anything. They're like, here's access. If you've got weird questions, we'll field them, but it's very rare that they're bringing in a third party. Then you get to Q of E, and I would say it's probably a week for Tech DD, depending on the size of the business, but and kind of the complexity of the product, but that's pretty straightforward. Then you get into Q of E, and that's more substantive. And the main thing is, so on the buyer side, we'll go into the buyer side, but on the seller side, this is where it really helps to have all your financial record keeping buttoned up. Because it's like, we want to see tax returns. We want to see accounting methods. We want to see P&Ls. We want to see all this other stuff. And so the time intensity of this exercise is really a function of how much together your stuff is. So if it's like, oh, shit, we don't have a balance sheet, or we don't have this and that, or our articles of incorporation, or our QuickBooks general ledger is a disaster, that is enough to spook a buyer probably.
Or everything lives in spreadsheets.
Yeah. At best, it's going to really slow down the deal. So anyway, that's one, again, where we speak to like probably one of the more productive things is to just organize your world and do a little internal wiki. Notion's great for that. And the financial documents are probably where you should focus. Okay. So on the buyer activity side, we've got revenue analysis, and this is more generic than it should be for SaaS, but a lot of times, instead of assessing recurring versus non-recurring, it's like, but I mean, to a degree, like there's professional services involved in implementation. Maybe there's some project-based stuff. Maybe they did some custom development for a client and they cost shared on that. So there is for sure non-recurring revenue more often than not, but the lion's share is probably ARR. So it's more about like, how do they recognize revenue? It's an annual contract, but you get paid monthly. Okay. So there's some complexity there. There's this concept of unearned income where it's like, some of these users paid for a year of software and they've only gotten 3 or 4 months. Okay, then you essentially haven't earned the income that they've already paid you. And that has implications when it comes time for transaction. You look at customer concentration risk, stuff like that. Then you move into earnings adjustments, which is, this concept of adjusted earnings, adjusted EBITDA, add backs, which are like weird spend, non-recurring spend that basically it misrepresents how productive and profitable the business is. So they're going to go into that. They're going to quantify seller discretionary earnings. So a lot of this stuff up until this point is like double checking your world. And I would say for the most part, this should be a double check. Like if you come into this and you haven't already poured through the P&L and gotten to a plan, that's standard stuff that the seller should be providing to you before you get to LOI. Because you need to look at the dollars and cents, period. So a lot of this is just double checking stuff, but cost structure and margins, you should have a good handle on that. Working capital in an asset purchase doesn't matter. And I guess to a degree in a stock purchase as well, it's just like, hey, you're taking all the cash out of the business. We're buying the assets. We need a point of view on working capital because we're going to bring working capital to the deal. The rule of thumb there is 3 months of expenses. But in software, you're not carrying inventory. There aren't these really drawn out kind of accounts receivable. It's about as basic as it gets. So working capital is pretty straightforward. It gets way more complex in, physical products, service-based businesses. If there's net 30, net 60, whatever. Cash proof and reconciliation. This is a very time-intense one. And you're basically looking at bank statements and matching it to the financials. And basically, simply put, the partner is trying to reverse engineer the financial statements to make sure that they're accurate. That's like probably the simplest way to say it. Depending on who you work with, they might do some work on client metrics. And then you want to dig into the balance sheet and just make sure that stuff checks out. And all of this is in service of some type of readout that is like, just call out the risks and the weird shit. and I want a quick readout, and then I want to see like an Excel kit that has kind of substantiate your work and how you got there. And so in terms of advisors on the buy side, you guessed it, a CPA, or it's an M&A advisor that probably has a CPA or something like that. But you want a third party just to give you a different point of view. And if you're working with a bank, this is a really important deliverable to help them build confidence that the books aren't cooked, et cetera, et cetera.
I would say before we move on from this section, let's give the listeners a few examples of what we've ran into in our few years of experience, right? So some common themes that might come up, for example, are there are always customers with weird deals. So always ask whose subscription plan has certain like deal structures or deal terms that we need to annotate within like the spreadsheets, the accounting system, wherever it matters. So as we acquire the business, we now know how to approach and deal with that customer if for whatever reason we need to update the terms of that deal. There's always customers with weird deal terms. And then the second theme is one accounting system is never the source of truth. It's usually a few of them coupled together, like some things you're going to see for churn over here or some subscription revenues over here, and then the add-ons are here. And it's like, you always want to ask, where does all your information live? And then the accounting, like QuickBooks, that, like you said, you can reverse engineer that and match it back up to all the other financial analysis tools that they're using. But there's always multiple beyond just like a QuickBooks.
Yeah. So like lifer customers is a gotcha. A heavy index of annual contracts is a gotcha, because that's where that concept of unearned income starts to come into play. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, and you want mostly like, and again, it's like, is logo retention what we thought it was? And we're going to measure that now based on like customers paying their bills. Do most are customers late paying their bills? Is there a ton of delinquent kind of payment shit that's happening? How are they invoicing?
Is there like a time for revenue recognition where we implement someone, but we can't bill them till like months later? Is anyone like on a non-annual plan while we're looking at this from the ARR perspective? So they have like 13-month and 16-month plans, like weird things like that.
Totally. Yeah. Pricing plans is another one to kind of try to get to it's like, I want to see users by pricing plan. And it's like, well, we've got this plan, this plan, this plan. And then there are these 12 super weird ones that only apply to these 12 customers. And it's like, okay, cool. Glad I asked that.
Yep.
All right. Sellers
How's that accounted here?
Yeah. And then there's like obviously cash versus accrual. I mean, there's a lot of nuance here. You want a third party to get in and look under the hood. Seller's role is basically lift up the hood. And I think in this point, from a seller advisor perspective, you probably want your CPA to help you kind of get organized. But from there, you should be able to run interference on the requests. So it's like, here's this, here's that, here's this, here's that. And then there are really pointed questions that you don't have the context, you bring in your CPA. But on the buy side, you're for sure spending money to bring in a third party that really knows their stuff. Assuming none of you are CPAs. I certainly am not. All right. Third stage here is the asset purchase agreement or a stock purchase agreement. And basically this is where you're 100% looping in your legal team. And it's the buyer's job to basically put forth a draft of the document first. And so it's going to define, and this is a very simplified version. We've obviously broken down an APA in much greater detail in the past, but it's got the purchase price. It's got the assets transferred. So there's all these schedules that actually define what the assets are, the liabilities that are assumed, if any, reps and warranties, right? So this is like, assurances that the assets are in the condition that they look or that they've been kind of represented as. And then warranties are what happens if things go south. And then indemnification is basically like how you will be made whole if things go south. So that's pretty simple. And you've got your lawyer, and this is like a lot of work, and obviously there's tons of precedent and templates and stuff like that that'll speed you up, but you're trying to shape a lot of stuff. And most often, the buyers are going to lean a little more. Obviously it's a buyer-centric document, like they're transferring it to you. So I would say on the buy side, it's more like, cool, this is the template thing that my counsel kind of recommends. You flip it to the sell side and assume that it's biased to the buyer. And your job then is to participate in negotiations. So the stuff that is kind of the point of contention around negotiations are reps and warranties, indemnification, and then caps and baskets. So there's probably like 20 points of negotiation. That might be a little overstated, but there's a lot. There's a shitload of points of negotiation. And there's, again, a lot of precedent and convention around that stuff. But you're like, hey, cool, we got the APA. My lawyer's going to redline it. And what you want to avoid is letting the lawyers get stuck in red line ping pong, where it's like, red line, back over here, we accept these, we push back on these. So I would say probably one cycle tops, where it's like if you're the buyer, you get the red lines back, chew on them, and then your job is to get together with the seller and just talk through it as normal humans and see what you can resolve, and then loop in lawyers and get everybody on the line. And the other thing is, if you bring your lawyer to the call, they have to bring their lawyer to the call, and that's all billable hours. So just be thoughtful, and I wouldn't say don't index towards like, I need my lawyer on this phone. It's like, hey, this thing, this rep seems a little fuzzy. Like, are you cool with this? Yeah. Okay. All right, I'm cool with that too. Okay, cool. And just try to like negotiate through it again as humans, and then give that feedback to counsel. What you want to do is just prevent really drawn out cycles, because that'll kill your wallet. That'll kill the timeline to close. Time kills all deals, all that kind of stuff. And then for the seller's role, they basically bring their lawyer in. They establish a point of view on the stuff that they're not cool with in terms of the draft that the buyers provided. And they've got their legal team riding shotgun the whole time as well. And this one is way more drawn out. So figure a week for tech DD, maybe 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks for QOV or financial verification, and then 4 to 6 weeks for asset purchase agreements. And this is assuming kind of larger scale purchases. Like you can get through this stuff in a month, especially if you have a lot of trust, between both sides. We've gotten it done in a month, and a lot of people compete on that. And there's other elements on the buy side, like if you're using debt financing, that can be a really drawn out thing. You're probably looking at 90 days at the best, etc. But that's all that. And then you get into closing, which is, the name of the game. So you see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's usually about a week, and that's you sign. So there's like a day where everybody signs the documents. There might be some money locked up in escrow, and it's like, cool, you sign, it's a done deal. You execute the asset purchase agreement, all the other stuff. You get the debt financing facilitated, blah, blah, blah. And closing is a week because there's a lot of and honestly, it's longer than a week, like real closing.
Yeah, it might be like 2 to 3.
Yeah. And there's always something that you forget where it's like, oh shit, yeah, this thing, sorry, I forgot to give you the password. But this is basically when we say account transfers or asset transfers, is like swapping the login and the credit or the billing for everything the business pays for. Transitioning a bunch of stuff. If you have employees, it's like healthcare and blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of action that's involved there, and it takes a week just to kind of hand over all that stuff. And more often than not, escrow is like a thing where you get through the lion's share of the asset transfer and both parties sign off, and then the money moves. So maybe you'll hold back 30% of the cash until the assets are transferred or something like that. And you use a third party that's usually, escrow, that's what that is. Where it's like, cool, we did all this thing, everybody held up their end of the bargain. What you don't want to do is say, hey, I signed the asset transfer and I just gave the other person the code base and shit, they didn't pay me. My God. And that's a disaster. Or vice versa. I sent them the money and I haven't heard back from them. So
they're in Hawaii.
It's rare, but it happens. So you want to be eyes wide. And it's a week of just kind of chopping wood. This thing, Google Suite, oh God, HubSpot, blah, blah, blah. And 1Password is your best friend, or LastPass, where it's like, cool, here's all the passwords of the stuff. Go nuts. Let me know when the accounts and the payments are transferred. The other thing that can be a little weird. Go ahead.
I was going to say, a trick I've learned in that scenario. So a lot of folks won't use software like 1Password, but what we're noticing is a lot of folks will have like their keychain on their Mac, their Google Password Manager, since a lot of things just being auto-generated and saved. So now that's a great way to have someone just say, all right, let's share screens, go through your Google Password Manager. What's this tool? What's that tool? Okay, just share them, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I would probably say the day or the afternoon of closing, you sign everything in the morning. That afternoon, you're spending 4 hours just screen sharing and just trying to just cut through as much of it as humanly possible. And it's like, oh, we've got these web domains and this thing and that thing. And you just put your mouth guard in and just go to work and try to get it done.
If you're madmen like us, you'll have a massive spreadsheet or Notion board already mapped out with all the foundational tools that have been brought up in conversation, what's being spent, what its usages is for, and then like how to contact support if transitioning the normal way is not just like, hey, change the email or change the password, right? Because there are going to be some server-related tools, back-end related tools where, hey, you may have to create a new account, contact support. They have to transition that with a sign-off. It gets hectic.
Or like transitioning like Facebook ad accounts and shit is forever. Oh my God. It's brutal. So anyway, I mean,
Yeah.
the thing is you just go and make your best effort, transfer as much stuff as you can, try to get most of it resolved, and then everybody's happy, you high five. But just know that like 2 or 3 weeks later, it's like, oh yeah, there was that thing that I forgot about. Let me get you the password. But all their like software spend, all their apps, their tools, blah, 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 should be an exhibit in the asset purchase agreement. So you're going in totally eyes wide because you're buying those
Yeah.
too.
Exactly.
You're buying those instances of technology, those, the contracts with vendors. And simply put, like, it's basically the code base and contracts. It's all intangible stuff. So the contracts are the customer contracts, the employee or the vendor or the employee contracts, and then the vendor contracts, which is any kind of recurring software, web domains, blah, 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 ad accounts. That's that. And then you sail off into the sunset and create a ton of value and everybody's happy and it's easy as hell.
A beach never felt better.
Yeah. But all right, that's the name of the game. And damn, I am losing my voice fast here. Kjael, that's a wrap, my guy. Always a pleasure. Let's see if my
It's a pleasure.
lasers weren't working. It was very upsetting. Oh, there they are.
Yeah.
Laser
They're
beam.
working. I'm still jealous about them. But yeah, until next time.
For the love of the game, my guy. Have a good rest
For
of
the
the
love
day.
of the game. Take care.
Peace.